Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, a podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. It's our annual end-of-the-year wrap-up with writers from around the globe who cover the beer industry. In a moment, you'll hear from Matt Kirkegaard, Christopher Shepard, Brandon Hernandez, and Melissa Cole. But first, please go visit allaboutbeer.com to see the latest. And if you want to support us in that endeavor, we set up a Patreon for both readers and professional companies in the beer space. Check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer to learn more. And for additional audio content, search All About Beer on your podcast platform of choice and listen to shows like Brewer to Brewer, the All About Beer podcast, and Beer Travelers, all which are now available. And if you're a fan of smoked beer, and of course you are, why not check out This Week in Rauch Beer? The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, we're at TW Rauch Beer. We're able to bring you this show each week thanks to the companies that support independent journalism in the beer space. Learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates by emailing info@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of that, this episode is brought to you by Pro Brewer. We bring original articles to probrewer.com each week, covering issues that are important to the beer industry and that are aimed at helping breweries of all sizes understand the different facets of the business. Check out our articles on probrewer.com every Tuesday and visit the site daily for other original content and to stay connected with the beer industry. I'm so glad to once again be doing this show with friends who cover the beer industry. Matt Kirkegaard is the founder and publisher of Brews News, Australia's leading brewing industry news and analysis source. He also hosts the Radio Brews News podcast. Melissa Cole is a journalist, the author of 5 books, including The Ultimate Book of Craft Beer. She's also an international judge, and she usually hates me around this time of year when Celebration is released. Christopher Shepard writes and edits and follows trends and analyzes data for the family of beer industry trade publications from Beer Marketers Insights. He is a senior editor of craft-focused Craft Brew News, which is a newsletter. He's also the editor of Alcohol Issues Insights, covering industry, environmental, social, government issues alongside alcohol policy and science. He also writes poetry, dances, and hikes near his home in the suburbs of New York City. And Brandon Hernandez is an award-winning San Diego-based beer travel journalist and author. He's covered the brewing industry for 17 years, contributing to thousands of articles to newspapers, magazines, and online outlets. He also spent nearly a decade working for craft breweries, including Stone, AleSmith, and Society. He's the founder of San Diego Beer News, an on-air correspondent for the Fox 5 San Diego, and 91X, a beer industry contributor for the San Diego Union Tribune, The New Brewer, and craftbeer.com. He has also been featured, my goodness, Brandon Hernandez, he's also been featured as the food and beverage editor for luxury publication Ranch and Coast magazine, and he's also the head of the Beer to the Rescue campaign, which has raised over $150,000 for the Lupus Foundation of Southern California since 2015. They all joined me via Zoom.
Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for doing this. It's always great to get together with fellow writers, even if it is virtually. And I had a whole bunch of things that I wanted to talk about because it's been a fairly eventful year. But Melissa, I want to start with you because when we're recording this on December 13th, I think it was just 2 days ago that a little bit of news happened that from your part of the world, that the Great British Beer Festival was not going to be happening in 2024. And I'm curious about that because there's obviously been a lot of changes with how people approach beer festivals. There's been, I don't know, I think it's at a crossroads right now, at least here in the US, but that the fest isn't going to happen in the new year. What does that mean for British beer?
Yeah, I mean, just one thing, sorry. I just have to open a can of this beer that you guys might actually be familiar with. It's called Celebration. Fuck you, Hall!
Did you get you finally got the 2021 version sent over? That's nice.
I'm so excited. I haven't actually drunk any yet. Hang on a minute.
Is it this year's? Is it the 23?
Yeah, it is. Right.
Wow.
Sorry, for anybody who's listening to this for the first time, John has spent years rubbing it in my face that he can just basically pick up cases and cases of Celebration from Sierra Nevada, and it has been like gold dust over here. And then for whatever reason, it's been super widely available for a given value of widely available.
I want to know what underlord deity you had to strike a deal with to get fresh Celebration, and what part of your soul you promised to get it.
I mean, I love that you assume it was my soul. That I have one for a start. But anyway, sorry. Right, back to the question.
It's so good. Celebration. It's worth repeating. Celebration is so good.
It is
so good. But Melissa, I have to one up you because
I know you've got like 9 million vintages.
No. Sierra Nevada, we wrote about this on allaboutbeer.com, but Celebration does a rare brewery only tapping of what they call Celebration drippings or Celly drippings, which is the bags that have been the bags of hops that have been soaking in the beer after they empty out their 800 barrel fermenters. Those bags are just hanging in the vast empty space, and it's like a tea bag, and all of that concentrated beer that's been hanging onto the hops drips to the bottom of the tank, and then they keg that off, and they get about like 6 kegs of it, or 6 sixths, something like that, that they can serve at the Mills River facility. And they sent me a crowler of it this year, and it's delightful.
I don't care how much I like Sierra Nevada. I still don't want them to teabag me.
God.
Well, here we are.
There we are. It didn't take long, but yeah.
Who had 3.5 minutes?
That was greeted with amazing.
Strap in, kids. Here we go. So tell us about the Great British Beer Festival.
Not one of you knew a response to that. That was just glorious. Anyway, it is absolutely sensational, and I've got to be honest. The words drippings and it all sounds. I'm sure it was delicious, but in principle, to my British ear, anyway, it sounds dreadful.
That's just the jealousy talking.
It really is. Anyway, right, I've set the tone.
As you do. Yeah.
As I do.
So what's going on with the fest?
So, I mean, really long and short, the real genuine issue is that the venue Olympia, which is really, quite honestly, probably the only venue capable of holding GBBF, which I know is something that, for example, the Brewers Association struggles with things like Craft Brewers Conference and World Beer Cup and also GABF. Is GABF has to be where it is because it's such a behemoth, and places where they can actually hold things like Craft Brewers Conference, it is really shrinking because of because it's such a huge thing. So a bit like the amount of cities that can go to in the US, really in London, Olympia is the only venue that is feasible. And so the problem is that Olympia is a knackered old building, and it is undergoing enormous renovation works. I mean, like huge. It's also, frankly, I said this before to people, I've said it in an editorial yesterday, it is a bit like getting pissed in a bus garage. It's not a welcoming, friendly or comfortable site to go to. So, I think that this is a really good time for CAMRA to stop and assess and do something whilst those building works are going on at Olympia that make it impossible for the venue to guarantee that GBBF can go ahead in the way that it needs to.
I want to bring everybody else in on this conversation in just a second, but you said CAMRA using this time to sort of assess. What does that mean? Like, what do they need to be thinking about long term at this point?
Well, a couple of things. The Campaign for Real Ale has very right and properly been pushing very hard to, if not keep up with the times, and not run quite so far behind them in recent years. And I take my hat off to the people at the top of the organisation and also the people in the voluntary part of the organisation who have really been pushing that. But I mean, honestly, if you are the Campaign for Real Ale and you're only putting on like 2 events a year, the Great Winter Beer Festival and the Great British Beer Festival, one's in Manchester, one's in London, and really the Manchester one is quite a lot smaller, I feel like you're not really actually doing the outreach work that you could be in terms of your campaign. And is actually that beer festival the showcase that you think it is? Because I can tell you now that everybody in the beer industry that I know walks out trade day and genuinely it's like, okay, open up the bingo card. Did you get somebody telling you didn't know what you were talking about beer when you took one back that tasted of vinegar? Tick. Did you get a volunteer say to you as a woman that you should be having a lady's glass or a half pint glass?
Oh, Jesus.
The problem is that it is not what it could be, and because it is such a beer moth, the problem is that these are such a small. Well, not the actual quality of the beer, but again, because the quality of the beer is just not good enough at this thing to make it a showcase. And the problem is that you've got all of this sort of coming together as a bit of a perfect storm. So everybody goes on the trade day to see all their pals and have a massive catch up. But then everybody leaves and goes somewhere else and bitches about it. And then by the time it gets to the Saturday, all that's left is dregs. It's not what it could be. And especially with all of the more modern beer festivals that are out and about now, that it really does throw it into a stark light. And that is not to criticise the thousands of volunteers who help put this together. The problem is the nature of the beast, not the people who are behind it.
Well, I was hoping actually to go in 24, but because I've never been, but I need to wait to get pissed in a bus station garage before 2025.
We can totally do that if you like.
Sure, yeah, we'll just show up at the Greyhound station at yeah.
Well, I mean, firstly, there's no Greyhound over here, but
well, the equivalent, yeah. Matt, I want to bring you in as it is now after midnight your time, and I want to keep you awake as best as possible. What are festivals like, or what have festivals been like in Australia this year?
Funnily enough, just this week, the Good Beer Week, which is probably our biggest consumer facing festival, was put in hiatus for 2024. Its future's been a little bit uncertain for a while, and in a lot of ways it really traces the history of craft beer in Australia. It was a festival that started 12, 13, 14 years ago, very organically. We have our major beer awards in May, and with all of the tribes coming together, everyone in Melbourne, it just seems silly not to have a beer festival. So this festival just took off with the industry support, venue support. It was a huge consumer outreach event, but they're becoming less and less relevant, because a big part of it was you could get craft beer from all around the country on tap, which you normally couldn't. But with so many just bars every day having great tap ranges of beer, having a concentrated week of trying beers just doesn't have the relevance anymore. So it's a huge thing to organise. It's massively expensive. All of the venues it's a citywide event. All of the venues complain, if they pay their money to be part of it and they don't get a crowd. So it's just been it's a real shame, because it was a wonderful event. But it just doesn't seem to have the relevance and the cachet anymore in a world where craft beer is just packed to the rafters everywhere that you go.
Brandon, sorry, go ahead.
It's really heartbreaking, because I was down there doing.
You've been a couple of times, yeah.
No, just once actually, sadly.
Oh, just once. Okay. It felt like a couple of times.
It feels like you never get rid of me. And it was amazing. Is Gab still going ahead as well?
Gabs is still going ahead. It's now a national event.
What is Gabs?
The Great Australian Beer Spectacular.
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 Yeah, puns.
Yeah.
You can say
at least
wordplay.
Ferris wheel in the one in Melbourne when I was there.
Yeah, and it's a great event, and it started. It was another one that just started in a small venue. I think twice a year, and just grew, and it became this huge event. And then it was sold a couple of years ago and has really become a national event. But again, it's trying to find its way forward, whereas once upon a time, it was really about what they had was specialty beers where, initially, I think 20 or 30 breweries all brewed a one-off beer for the event. And now I think there's over 100. But those sorts of novelty beers are just a dime a dozen these days. So whereas it was a thing to introduce a huge range of very interesting experimental, boundary pushing beers, that's just about every brewery's seasonal release. And by seasonal release, I mean, almost weekly. So those sorts of events are really struggling to find, a relevance with consumers who can turn up at any bar and have every one of their whims catered to.
Hey, Brandon, it is now 20 after 6 a.m. your time, so I want to keep you awake as well. You've been traveling around this year. You've been to a couple of festivals. You've seen some things and been doing this for a long time as well. What's been your read on a lot of these consumer events over the last year?
I think it's really interesting here in the United States, because I do get around, different places, different time zones, different places that are in their individual journeys, the spot on the journey of craft beer. So just so everyone listening knows, I'm from San Diego, and it's where I was born and raised. And so I've watched the craft beer movement go.
You were not born in San Diego.
Well, okay. I'm close enough. But that was it would take me 15 minutes to get into the whole thing. Okay, I was born in Landstuhl, then West Germany, on a military base. Came back to where both my sides of my family are from in San Diego.
All right, fine.
2 months later.
I'm just here for accuracy, pal.
I do appreciate you for that. But yeah. So San Diego saw it from the beginning all the way to where it is now. And so kind of a forerunner in the United States as far as craft beer culture and just kind of seeing where the craft beer movement could go and would go and has gone. When I go to different cities that are a little behind us, I see them at different points that I can recognize from San Diego's history. And it's really interesting because some folks, they could have a beer week or a big festival and it'd be a huge deal. And as well, it should be. And then there's other places where, like in San Diego, we used to joke around when San Diego Beer Week came around. They say Beer Week is every week. There were literally multiple festivals every single weekend, I think, in 2017, 18. And then the pandemic came along. We figured it would bounce back and everybody be just really eager to get out to these events. But it turns out not so much. And San Diego Beer Week has kind of not gone away or become a terrible thing or become some awful shadow of what it was, but it's just not what it was. And the interest isn't there, kind of like what Matt is talking about. There's just so many venues and people are pushing the envelope all year long. So you see that. But then again, I go to other places where they're a little earlier, like the Renos and the Salt Lake Cities, Jacksonville, and they're all about it. They're kind of like 10 to 15 years into their development, and beer is a much bigger thing than it is in San Diego because it's newer and they haven't pushed all the boundaries yet. They haven't seen where it can go from an event standpoint, and even gotten maybe to some of the second tier events that involve say food or cross drinking with spirits and other craft beverages. So it's very case by case to me. But I do believe that of all these years of going to different places and seeing how they kind of stack up to my hometown, that there is a certain there is a certain track that these different beer cities are running on, and eventually they get to pretty much the same place. It's really interesting. But right now, I think there's a lot of interest in these types of events all over, and I think that some of the Vanguard events that we love so much are maybe struggling more than they have in the past. But that's probably just following the trends of overall interest in craft beer, market challenges that segment is facing, and all of that. But I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more as we talk here more today.
Yeah. Well, that was certainly my experience at the Great American Beer Festival this year. I went on the first night and it felt empty at the Colorado Convention Center. And, you know, it's the room felt a little bit older. I didn't see that, that younger crowd that had long populated Thursday nights. And I mean, honestly, it felt, I don't know. It felt a little stark at times. And there's obviously some things that GABF added this year. They had a seltzer and a gluten-free pavilion, and the gluten-free was cool. They also had the international beer section at the Great American Beer Festival this year, which I thought was kind of interesting. And, I didn't really have anything from there, but they're definitely trying to broaden things out to newer generations and to get people to come out. Shep, nobody does numbers better than you. Nobody follows trends better than you through the data. What's the beer drinking consumer like these days?
There's a beer drinking consumer?
Oh man. Just pack it in, everybody. We're all out of a job.
It's I joke, but like sort of only a little bit. I mean, we've been watching for a long time now. Consumers just be interested in sort of more different, new. That's been a struggle for craft for a long time, and honestly, it's not just craft that's struggling right now. This is, I cover craft, but I cover the total U.S. beer industry, and this is almost certainly going to be the worst year for U.S. beer volume since Prohibition. Just period. End of sentence. My company has been tracking U.S. beer volume since 1970, and we've not seen anything like this. We're talking about, right now, volume is tracking down mid single digits. Usually it's like 1%. So we're looking at like 5 times that.
Jesus.
The amount of barrels that are sort of, disappearing out of the industry this year is literally unprecedented since the government said no more. And so
that's Prohibition in 1920. Yeah,
exactly. Right. And so, that's the whole industry is sort of grappling with like, what do we do here? And so it's to me, I look at that and there are plenty of consumers that are still like, yes, I drink beer. I drink beer all the time. I drink mostly beer, but that is a smaller and smaller group of people. And the group of people that are drinking all sorts of different things is growing more and more. Again, that's not a news story. It's just hitting a lot harder this year than it has in the past. And those other consumers that are drinking across a wide array of beverages are younger. My generation, the millennial generation, we started that in a big way a decade ago. That was part of the reason why craft grew so strongly a decade ago, because we were interested in drinking different things, and craft was a different thing. As we move into the Gen Z generation, there is more of that. And also just, do I really need to be drinking, right? Is that the thing? I think that story is a little bit overblown, the way that it's been sort of portrayed in the press. It's not like this mass exodus away from alcohol, but a couple of percentage points matter.
Yeah.
You have 3 to 5%, or maybe even a bit more of a generation that's just a little bit more skeptical and a little bit more interested in just cutting back. that makes a difference. So it's been a rough year for the U.S. beer industry, and clearly not just in the U.S.
When you talk about barrelage
Yeah.
disappearing, are places closing, or are they just putting their efforts into other beverages that are not beer?
Yes.
Okay.
So the vast majority of those barrels are not being made at small breweries. Right there, I'm mostly talking about very large breweries, and let's be clear, a huge amount of that volume is being lost by the largest brewer in the country and in the world.
Anheuser-Busch InBev.
Who's losing over a tenth of their U.S. volume this year. And
is that solely on Bud Light?
No, it's mostly Bud Light. Bud Light is down by it'll probably be 20 to 25%, right? So we're talking about the largest brand in the country losing almost a quarter of its volume, which is just monstrous. But the scary part of that is that that volume's not being picked up by other brewers. Molson Coors is having a great year with Miller Lite and Coors Light. They're having record years with the growth there, total turnaround stories, because those brands have been in decline for a while too. But they're not getting all of it. Everyone's talking about Modelo Especial. It is, in fact, I'm here to tell you, not the new number one brand by volume in the country. That'll still be Bud Light at the end of the year, but it's not getting all of those barrels either. Nobody is, because a lot of those barrels are just leaving the industry. And on the craft side, I mean, there are some breweries that are closing. Amazingly, the BA sort of put their best estimate out right now. It's still not like a crazy high spike. It's still not like all of a sudden, 2 or 3 times what it was the last couple of years. It's higher. There's more of them that are closing, and that number will go up as as we do as they do a little bit more research and get the full numbers. There are more breweries that are making other things, but honestly, the other big story for the barrels disappearing from the beer industry this year is that a lot of those barrels include hard seltzer, right? Malt and sugar based hard seltzer is included in that volume that we count, and seltzer is down huge this year because a lot of that is moving to other beverages. And the Twisted Teas, the FMBs, the Simply Spiked lemonades of the world are not picking up all the volume that seltzer's losing. A lot of that's going to spirits-based seltzers, the High Noons, the canned cocktails, and those kinds of things. But that doesn't make up for all the volume either. There is actually just sort of volume disappearing from alcohol in 2023. So a lot of people are asking themselves, like, what do we do in this world? Haven't heard too many fabulous answers yet, but we'll see what 2024 brings.
Melissa, who's on her second can of Celebration at the moment, when you're at bars, and I know you frequent pubs and you're out about in town, what are people drinking? What do you see being passed over the bar to drinkers?
I mean, obviously, in the UK, in pubs, we are a pretty point-based society. We do vertical drinking better than anybody else in the world, but which inevitably leads to horizontal sleeping or passing out. I think that the issue again, I mean, they're all the same things that Chip's just talked about there, and it is. No doubt that as night follows day, the UK trends follow the US trends. Interestingly, one of the things that's never really made a dent here, although I do notice that White Claw is taking a big swing at opening a huge winter wonderland bar over here, is that hard seltzers never really hit it. But we are very fond of a premixed cocktail. Interestingly, I would say that they're more of a preloading thing. They're more of an off-trade than an on-trade thing. People tend to preload on them, or therefore drinking on trains or things like that. But yeah, I think that there is very much a scratching of heads, and very much one of the things that when I'm talking to people and I'm doing a few mentoring bits and pieces with folks at the moment through a a scheme set up by a woman called Amelie in Scotland, which is WIB, Women in Beer. But this is all about mentoring people. It's talking about hyper-local. And there are a lot of people who have left bigger breweries and said, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to open my small place, and it's going to be comfortable. It's not going to be cavernous. It's going to have open mic nights, and it's going to have comedy, and it's going to have local artists, and it's going to have all those sorts of things. So like tap rooms are still doing really well. In fact, I'd say that they're doing very well. And if you're a brewery at the moment, particularly in the UK, who wants to open up, my advice to everybody is, firstly, don't bother selling pizza. Everybody else does. Do something else. And also make your place comfortable. Nobody wants... I mean, it was never industrial chic in the first place. It was just cheap and bloody cold and uncomfortable.
Also, just pizza anywhere outside of the New York metro area is an abomination, so don't do it.
Okay. And that's when the fight started. So
that's another conversation. Matt,
I couldn't care less about pizza, so you all can have a...
I know you don't want people to make it because you want people to come and visit the greater New York metro area and get the best pizza in the world. I understand. Matt, you and I have had this conversation about hard seltzer not taking off or not resonating in the same way down by you. Is that still the case?
Yeah, look, it's there have been people that have given it a try. It had a little bit of a, anything that's new is going to have a little bit of an interest bump, and seltzer has been very much about that. But we have a big canned cocktail, what we call them ready to drinks.
RTDs,
spirits, RTDs. And this year we had a big kerfuffle when one of our largest breweries... Do you have Solo, which is a soft drink, anywhere else in the world?
I don't know it.
No.
Okay, it's just a lemon flavored soft drink.
Okay,
but it's for 50 years. It's been a drink in Australia, and it was always targeted as being an adult soft drink. Very much, if you think of 1970s mustachioed men in short shorts being awesome, canoeing and rock climbing and things like that.
They had very much too, didn't they?
Yes,
sign me up.
So it was the thirst crusher, light on the fizz so you could knock it down fast, and that was always its motto. And in this year, Asahi, which makes Foster's, decided to weaponize it by putting ethanol in. There's no glamour to it. It's not a partnership with a spirits company that has a brand and some form of provenance. It's just alkalized Solo. And they didn't change the branding. They didn't do anything. And it just really was a red rag to the bull for regulators this year. But at the same time, it's been huge. It was a massive launch because it tastes just like soft drink, but has alcohol in it. So you don't get any flavor break you don't have the bitterness that beer has. You don't have, if you have a cocktail, you still taste the alcohol. This has just been something that has just been easy alcohol to consume in its easiest, most infantile form. And it's gone through the roof. And I think that's where a big part of the market is.
So, I mean, we had
stuff like that years back. So this is actually kind of our second wave of RTDs. So we had things like, God, I mean, we're going back at least 20 years here. Things like Smirnoff Mule, Smirnoff Ice.
Yep. We've had all of those.
Way earlier than the rest of the world. We were about 5 years before they actually put it out to the rest of the world. It was a Diageo. I don't think it was even Diageo. Was it even Diageo at that point? I can't remember. But it was a real, let's see how it goes in the UK. And there was also some slightly more, in inverted commas, artisan ones in Woodies. And then really the big hit was Hooch and Two Dogs, and they were exactly what, and also Reef, which was sort of a tropical passion fruit and mango, and another flavor as well. I can't remember. And they were just like drinking juice, and you really didn't know, and people would get absolutely mortaled on them. And it was all aimed at students, university student venues. They were a bit ahead of their time. Some of them, they tried cans quite early on, didn't quite nail it. I don't think the canning technology was quite there then, but all of these things were happening, and then it sort of went away because premium packaged lagers came in, and people kind of wanted to be seen with, this, when Stella Artois was considered a premium product, and Beck's and things like that. And I think Michelob had a time in the sun as well. And so all of those things kind of superseded it. But it's really interesting that they're called revolutions for a reason, right? They're circular, but it's a funny thing to see that this is effectively coming back to the fore. And going back to your point about weaponizing an existing soft drink, that just strikes me as a really, really short-term vision.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Melissa. Because that is one of the probably top 5 stories of the U.S. alcohol industry.
I was going to say,
is the entrance of the large soda companies. That's been building over the last couple of years. Hard Mountain Dew from Pepsi, also doing a Lipton hard iced tea, which is much smaller at this point, but that's pretty new. Coke has a bunch of different things. It's working with a bunch of different alcohol suppliers. There's the Jack and Coke, canned Jack and Coke. That's global. There's Simply Spiked. There's a bunch of things that I'm not going to remember or try to remember.
The Dunkin' Donuts that got in with, I know that's not a soda company, but Dunkin' Donuts got into it this year.
Right. And one of the ways that I look at this trend is listen, we're talking about a world where big hasn't exactly been in fashion for a while, right? No matter what category you're in, there's been sort of fragmentation and sort of shift to the bottom. That's been true in beer. That's been true in spirits to a lesser degree, but in lots of different consumer-facing goods. And so, it's also a world of collabs, right? Like the Instagram culture of, especially niche or high-end brands, especially fashion brands, are all about the collaboration, so-and-so X somebody else working on some specialty release. And so that drives interest, that drives conversation. And so, even if it is a short-term bump, it's a short-term bump that they didn't have last year. But the other thing that a lot of people are talking about when it comes to drinks is that they're starting to question, are we looking at sort of a precursor to a more consolidated drinks business, right? Are we looking at the possibility of these sort of major soda companies and major breweries or other suppliers in alcohol coming together, merging, being acquired, so on and so forth, right? Is the next stage of global drinks consolidation finally sort of breaking down the barrier between alcohol and non-alcohol, which has existed for a long time, but these sort of collaborations, some people will say it's just sort of footsie for that next stage of consolidation.
I mean, it very well, yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think for a couple of reasons. One is mostly I think this is, I would say that this is extreme, and this is just a supposition on my part, but if you're going to be somebody in these big companies, then they've got some of the smartest people in the world working for them. I mean, also I've met some of the dumbest people in the big companies as well, but that's part of life. But you've got people that are not just looking at the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You've got people who are working on the next 50 to 100 years. And particularly with the issue of climate change, consolidation makes a lot of sense. Number of reasons is that it actually means that you can consolidate a lot of your shipping, your transportation, your trucking, your canning, your ability to buy raw ingredients. your ability to buy packaging, all those sorts of things, your ability to then also work on byproducts, whether it's bioethanols or CO2 recapture, things like that. And also the other thing as well is that, frankly, water. If I was Coca-Cola or Pepsi or whoever, and I was looking at something and thinking, who's another company that needs good food safe or ability to build plants that can make it food safe, drink safe, water? I want to be in bed with them.
Yeah, and it's sort of a weird. I am interested in. I've been following a little bit, and I'm interested to see sort of where it goes, right? But some big companies are a whole lot better at investing in those kinds of things, right, and sort of protecting those things than a lot of smaller companies. That's not mutually exclusive. That's not sort of across the board. But there's been a ton of investment in that. There are all sorts of concerns. Don't think that I'm standing here today, sort of rah consolidation. I have plenty of concerns about those things too. And there's also this. We're in a moment in the U.S. at least where there is a sort of revival of antitrust and sort of trust busting by the current administration in the federal government, and so we'll see how that evolves as well. But yeah, it's you raise a good point in terms of the sort of very long-term view and the sort of long-term strategic view of these companies. You can sort of see why it makes sense to them, right? Why those numbers sort of work out. But I think I frame it in a sort of response to the consumer, right? The consumer does seem less interested in big though, right? Which is sort of the primary problem, right? If they can't grow the big brands, they find ways to collaborate to get that bump. But that long-term trajectory isn't great. And so that should benefit small breweries, right? That should logically benefit small brands. Maybe not in 2023. We'll see how 2024 goes. Question mark.
Matt, does any of this resonate with you and what you're seeing? We've lost Matt. Brandon, while we wait for Matt to get back. Oh, there you go.
I had myself on mute while I coughed and forgot to unmute.
It's all good.
Yeah, look, it does, and it's been one of the things that I've been watching. And I guess we're all beer writers, and beer is our passion. So there's always a little bit of me that gets disappointed when you see the shift away from beer, and I really try and understand what's driving that. And I've spoken to 2 or 3 generations of brewers that have talked about how beer is such a challenging thing to first come at. Bitterness is, we're hardwired to avoid beer as children, because apparently it's an evolutionary thing where poisons tend to be bitter, so it's an acquired taste. And in a world where alcohol has become so sweet and infantilized, people aren't waiting around to acquire a taste for beer. And I really worry what that means long term, as because all of our diets have changed substantially, and beer is really going to struggle to win new followers, particularly. And I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts about this. Craft beer created such excitement over the last 10 or 15 years, but is craft beer now starting to be seen as disco once was, where it's not really being remembered for the flavor innovation, but more for the culture that was so closely identified with it, that is actually not as interesting to a new generation coming through?
Brandon, I want to hear from you on that.
I applaud Matt because he agrees with me. I have been saying this for a long time. Because I have a child, I have grandchildren, so I've been looking at these generational things also when I worked at breweries, and I'm gonna paint in really broad strokes here. So no offense to anybody, and I don't think any one generation is like quote unquote better than another or anything like that. But when I was coming up and generations before me, it was all about becoming an adult as fast as you could. You wanted to be an adult. And for the longest time, before we had things like social media to show us what any of that could be, you had this one version of being an adult. You move out, get a job, make a family, and you drink alcohol and do fun things like that, right? But then the alcohol back then was generally beer, but there was also things like hard drinks and hard alcohol, and that's how you knew. I mean, not to get into genders and stuff, but like for men, like that's how you knew you were a man. And it's like a lot of the way that things like the Arrogant Bastard campaign and all of that worked, right? Because it really triggered things like that. You wanted to show that you could go to the extreme, even these things that were bitter and didn't really sync with your palate, but you muscled it down until you got there. Then before you knew it, you had a big full-on blown problem. Just kidding. But you found that you loved beer because you acquired that taste, much like, fancy cheeses and other things like that just don't necessarily sync with the palate, but you get used to it and you find an appreciation for it. And next thing you know, you love it. The younger generations these days have different aspirations that don't involve any of the things I just mentioned as far as what my idea of growing up meant, which is move out. Well, not necessarily. Get a job. Not if I don't have to. Make a family. I'm not really interested in having kids. I want to follow my own dreams. And it's like, okay, well, that's cool. Beer and hard alcohol aren't even part of the equation necessarily. And as far as challenging a palate, I'd say that these generations are less into challenging their palates than ever before. And honestly, if we'd had those options when we were younger, I think that we would have been the same way, because essentially you're going from having different fruit flavors of a soda brand to having different fruit flavors of a seltzer brand or a kombucha brand or anything. But really the seltzer thing is what we have to hit on, right? Because that was the disruptor, and disruptors are really good at doing one thing, and that's disrupting, and not really good at doing another thing, which is lasting. I mean, we all hate Netflix now, right? We all hate all the streaming services now as they become cable. So I think that these generations will come around and they will eventually challenge their palates when they get bored of things, or they just shift. We'll see a cultural thing, but I think they're just going to come around a little later, and hopefully they come back around to beer and things like that. It's really interesting too. And on the back end of that, we have these people who are now being lured in by the nostalgia of brands that they knew as kids. People who are into beer are being drawn back by the Mountain Dews and what'd you say, Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, things that we people of my generation, I am 47 years old. We're very, very much affected by marketing, TV marketing and magazine marketing in particular when we were growing up. And so, I mean, I went into marketing because I enjoyed things like that so much. So these things are ingrained in our head. Like, I will still play with the Transformer. I will still build a Lego set right now because they are so cool. So, it's an interesting way for people to kind of get back a share that they had lost years and years, maybe decades ago, just by putting the word Mountain Dew on something. It's kind of nuts to me, but people at least maybe give it a shot where they wouldn't have given it any kind of credence if it was some kind of just brand new brand that had nothing to do with anything. I think people are just throwing spaghetti against the wall right now. Some of it's kind of sticking, but you're seeing a lot of it just kind of like fall to the floor at this point. So there's a lot of shaking out to be done. And I think that those consolidation predictions are very valid. I could totally see it happening. And I honestly think with as wild west as things have become, that even for craft, the best thing that you could see is maybe some consolidation, not consolidations really for them so much as teaming. A decade ago when I worked at Stone, I actually said to Greg Cook, I think maybe the only, when all the big brands were buying up craft brands, I said, I really think that something that could really help these larger craft brands would be for like the likes of Stone and Avery and Maui and others to just make one big giant group and lean on the shared costs and shared distribution networks and really get this thing going. I still think that would have worked quite well back then. I think it's probably a little too late now, but you never know. I
But
think
there are
that
some places that are doing that for sure. Yeah.
Oh, sure. But I think that we probably need to see it I think we will see it actually on a larger scale and more people doing it. Yeah. Anyways, but to go back to it, I'm not into fruit flavored stuff. So,
Melissa, you're on the forefront of education. I know you do a lot of radio presenting and television presenting, and you do a lot of tastings, and you travel around, and you're educating folks. And I think Brandon just brought up, some interesting things about the younger generation doing what they're doing right now until they get bored and go looking for something else. What's the state of beer education from your perch right now, and where does it go?
I think one of the major issues that we've got, and I would say that this is something that I would level at a lot of the US, and I saw a bit of a change around this year at unfortunately I couldn't be there, but I did notice at GABF a lot of the OG faces were actually there. There's a lot of owners who just decide not to turn up to anything anymore for whatever reason. It's fine. But when a lot of these breweries are built on the cult of personality, and people are trying to encourage and engage people that are maybe younger or maybe not even into beer, to say, oh, listen, you should come to this. Not only the beer's great setup, but it's a super cool person and they're really amazing. And I remember the first time I met them and I was blown away by their interest and their empathy. And then you get greeted by some scruffy herbert behind the bar who's standing there scratching their ass, and the person you're with is just like, yeah, this seems really cool. One of the big problems I see is a lack of presenteeism and engagement from founders and owners. Not necessarily that you have to be there every single time, of course not. You're knackered, you probably need a knee replacement. All of these things are totally understandable. Basically I'd say 40 to 50% of the founders who I know who are now in their late 40s and 50s are already looking at some sort of joint replacement, because brewing has historically, and is still stupidly, a ridiculously hyper macho culture where you throw things around the place that you don't need to. But the problem is that there's so few people who are really bringing those kind of ambassadors through. So I was chatting with Big Brow, I won't name them, a very big, very iconic brand, which has a program of brand ambassadors. And they're one of the few breweries who are actually gaining taps, because they have brand ambassadors who go in, they do staff training, they go to festivals, they show people how to pour a beer, they immerse them in a culture, and they have converts. Everybody's like, everybody should bloody know about craft beer now, shouldn't they? This shit does not happen by osmosis. I can't tell you the amount of 50-year-old blokes at festivals down to 18-year-olds who have just started drinking, who honestly didn't even know that a hop was a plant. Everybody has just got, and I get it, I know that everybody's in a scramble, everything's difficult, but we've gone from a community of people who are so excited to educate and engage and really enjoy what it is that we're doing, to just going, oh Christ, I've got to meet another person. Oh, I don't want to hit another beer nerd in my life. They're going to tell me they like any IPAs. God, instead of saying, hey pal, if you like an any IPA, why don't you try our pale ale? It's not a West Coast IPA. Don't panic. It's not bitter. It's not going to blow your head off. But why don't you try this? Or, hey, listen, if you've got a sweeter palate, you're going to want to try our milk stout. I promise you, I know you think you don't like dark beers. I know you probably think that's going to... Do you like coffee? Do you like chocolate? Do I have good news for you? Instead of just... Everybody's just got tribal and judgy, and frankly have gone wildly backwards on diversity and inclusivity as well.
I'm getting mindful of time at this point, so I'm curious, and I want to kind of go around with two more questions for everybody. But the first one is, what will 2023 be remembered for, and what's on the horizon for 2024? And Brandon, I'm going to start with you.
I say 2023 will probably be remembered, at least where I'm at, because I do report on my home region in a very focused manner, as the realization of post-pandemic, or the pandemic, all the things that we expected to come from or during or after the pandemic finally happening, with breweries starting to close, things getting real tight, there being no funding and things like that, and the real challenge is coming. And I think that it'll be remembered as a time when whatever's going to happen, that's going to, whether it be people leaning on each other, bringing on people with business acumen, or whatever it might be, the beginning of the implementations of the things that will ultimately make the difference between breweries staying around or having to close up shop. But also, it's going to be remembered as time when breweries, the new breweries, shifted towards what I kind of have believed for a long time they were ultimately going to become in the craft beer world, and that's breweries that are much like at the dawn of breweries back in the old world, places that service their immediate neighborhood, their community, hubs for that community. Maybe craft beer was never meant to be this big behemoth, but as a trend, it can be, but as a long-lasting thing, maybe it's not supposed to be. And we're seeing a lot of success with models like that here in San Diego, where it's an expansive county. There are so many different municipalities and sub-neighborhoods within them. And the small breweries that are family-run, or just, is a place for those people who are just passionate about beer brewing, but not necessarily their job, and said, I want to make brewing my job. It's a perfect model for them, and it's working out quite well. I think 2024, we'll see more sliding, but I think we'll also see kind of a leveling out and a shakeout of maybe operations that just aren't poised for the ultimate future of craft beer. They're just not the type of organization that's going to flourish in the new age. And there's nothing wrong with that, because they were built in an age that was much different, and they could in no way foresee exactly what was coming down the pipe, and maybe they just couldn't recover, or the big word since 2020, pivot. But we're just gradually getting to where we're going to be as far as an industry, and we're going to continue down that path. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes, for sure. But I think that we'll also see a lot more innovation as people continue to fight the good fight, and continue to make their passion project something that is viable for the future.
Melissa, how are you going to remember the year, and what are you thinking about for next year?
The next year, I think it's going to be pretty much the same here. I think, again, I'll go back to, as I was saying, that hyperlocality, that understanding, that connection to community is going to be absolutely vital. I think that I have some hope for the UK brewing industry continuing, albeit it's snail-like progress, into a more diverse place. We just had our first non-white beer writer of the year, which was super exciting, in the shape of David. And there are people of colour owning more and more breweries, whether that's Black or Southeast Asian, which is amazing. And you're seeing that sort of thing. But it just, I think we're also going to see more of a closing of ranks for a bit as well, and that's a little concerning. I don't think there's going to be any big purchases, and I think there's some people who are really both financially and emotionally gearing themselves towards that, and I think it might come back and bite them on the arse. And I think also, to be honest with you, next year is going to be such a tumultuous year politically in the UK that
Maybe here in the US too. Yeah.
Maybe there in the US as well. I'm rather hoping that we're going to swing away from that. I sincerely hope you guys don't swing back towards it. But it's really, it's very, very scary. And also just economically at the moment, life is horrific in the UK for people. It's just, we've got unprecedented levels of child poverty, child hunger, people using food banks. It's abysmal. So it's an incredibly uncertain world. I think all I know about next year is it's probably going to get worse before it's going to get better.
Matt, what about you?
God, it all sounds very bleak, doesn't it? I think 2023 in Australia is going to be remembered for the number of breweries that went into what we call administration. I'm not sure whether it's this Chapter 11, I think that you've got in the US, where businesses can restructure. They effectively go to an external manager who looks at the business, decides whether it's viable, quite often looks at its debts, offers a settlement of all of its debts to creditors, and then potentially can continue to trade afterwards. We've seen quite a number of breweries use that. And that's very much what has been the story of the year this year. I think a lot of that's going to be forgotten about next year. We're just coming into our summer trade period. Christmas is the height of summer here. So that's when everyone's on holidays. It's the hottest weather. Beer drinking tends to be at its peak. The number of brewers that I've heard talking about, so long as we have a good hot summer, we've had a couple of rainy summers nationally the last couple of years, we'll be okay. And when you hear businesses hoping for dry weather as a guide to whether or not they're going to have a good trade period, that's very concerning. So, I think once we get through Christmas and the Christmas card bills come in, January, February, if it hasn't been a great summer for them and consumer spending tightens, particularly if we get another interest rate rise as we've had down here, I think it could be a very, very bleak period for a lot of brewers that, have really just been holding on for most of this year.
Chip?
Bleak indeed. So sorry, but I'll try to turn it around. And I already said it. Listen, in my world, 2023 has been one story, and it will be remembered for a very long time as the year that a social media post by a transgender influencer took down or ended up in the sort of number one brand losing a quarter of its volume. That story is going to be studied in universities, in marketing programs, as a case study for many, 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 many years. We just we haven't seen it before, and it's indicative to a lot of things. I
was going to say, just beyond marketing, like this is it's a story of America right now, honestly, and I think that's one of the reasons. And the ugly side of it,
yeah. Oh yeah, it is a story that is really sort of captures the divided and divisive rhetoric of the country that is, and frankly, is, as I know, folks around the world, it's not just here that sort of is feeling that way. And Melissa just alluded to this moments ago, and so I think that's another of the reasons why the story will be followed and why 2023 will be remembered that way, is because it really so clearly captures the feeling of the country, and the way that the social media world and the written media that can really be weaponized, another use of that word today, but as I look forward into 2024, I also know that there are a lot of people who are thinking very carefully about that, and so 2024, I think the real question will be about whether folks can sort of figure out how to sort of buckle down, sort of focus on the fundamentals when we're, especially when we're talking about smaller breweries and the craft world. Are you paying attention to what's happening in your space and in your community? Are you sort of digging deeper and really trying to sort of plant those seeds and sort of tend to that business to sort of set it up for longer term growth and not just sort of one-off pops? And as the total beer, I frankly hope that the larger beer industry starts thinking about things that way too. And if that's the case, then maybe 2023 gets remembered as this sort of end of this cycle, because frankly, the US beer industry has been declining for a decade and a half. Maybe 2023 becomes remembered as this sort of end of this cycle and this sort of quick drop off that then allows it to start to rebuild and reconnect and allow drinkers to reconnect with beer. So I'm going to try to end on that up note, my hopeful optimism side. I don't know that's definitely going to happen, but that's what I'm hoping.
All right, so this is going to be the last round of questions so that Matt can go to bed and probably Brandon goes back to bed, and Melissa, who is now on her 7th celebration, needs to get to the pub for the proper. Shep, I'm going to keep it going with you though.
Great.
And I like that I just interchange Chip and Shep throughout this episode. As journalists, we don't always insert ourselves into the story, and nor should we. But this has been a year of closures. This has been a year of places that we came up with that are have either closed or are planning on closing. And I'm wondering if you, not as the journalist, and this is going to go to everybody, but not as the journalist, but as a beer drinker, as somebody who enjoys being out in the world, was there a closure that happened or that has been announced that resonated with you? And so that's the first part of it. And then the second part is, what was a new to you brewery that you went to this year that excited you?
This is so easy for me.
Okay.
Because my local brewery, my favorite local brewery, I have a number of them, but my favorite local brewery here in the suburbs of New York City, decided to sell its original location here in the county to focus its operations on a newer facility that it built a little bit further north. It's a little bit harder for me to get to. Industrial Arts.
Chief. Yeah.
Built an amazing, beautiful brewery in this really cool old brick sort of complex of warehouses. It took over a large amount of space here 8 years ago, when it opened and started brewing these absolutely amazing beers that I, to this day, absolutely love. They were growing really quickly, built a much, much larger facility up in Beacon, another, 20
which
minutes,
is a beautiful brewery that everybody should go to. Yeah.
Freaking amazing.
Matt, Melissa, Brandon, I'll come visit and we will go to the new Industrial Arts facility. It is
so let's do that.
It's near brewery perfection. Next year, let's do this show from there.
Oh my God. Oh. Well, right. So let's do that. Then let's
no
go
microphones.
Down.
Yeah. We're just going to go and drink there. Yeah.
But then let's go down to the original location in Garnerville, because one of the things that Jeff O'Neill, who's the proprietor of Industrial Arts, did is he, wasn't he probably could have gotten more money working with somebody else, but he sort of stuck out and found a guy who was going to take over that original place and open a brewery that opened a week after they closed the tap room in Garnerville. It's called Round Table Brewery. Okay. And they're making, because I was, I have come close with Jeff, and he sort of gave me the scoop beforehand, and I met Ricardo, who was previously involved in Equilibrium, but sort of separated from them a number of years ago, and then started his own place here with his wife and one of his longtime friends. They are Argentinian, and so there is a lot of the inspiration for the beers and for the branding is their Argentinian heritage, which frankly fits really well. The sort of North Rockland area, the Havistra area there is very heavy Latin American, Central American, and South American. And they're making their flagship beer is this completely gorgeous. They call it a rustic ale. It's not quite sour, but it just gets up to it. Called Alto Lindo, and it's just beautiful. And it's a very different sort of brand experience. It's a very different sort of beer. The space is very different. But it's a story that I love because, listen, I can still get industrial arts all over the place, and I still will be. But I can still go to this space that I love going to, and still drink really fabulous beer that has it in a totally different vibe. So that question's super easy for me, and I'm thrilled by it.
That sounds like a win-win.
It totally is.
Still drink the beers everywhere that you really love, but now you've got something even better.
Yeah, it really
I
is.
just sound like boasting, actually, Chip. I've got the
Yeah. Melissa, brewery that closed, brewery that's that you discovered.
Last year, I think I would have just moved into our new house pretty much, and I was super excited because just down the road was Boxcar, who make a spectacular mild, which is just the most amazing drink, and it is properly low ABV, beautiful, silky but still bitter, light but not watery. It's just sensational, absolutely world class. And then about 4 months later, they went bust. Well, they didn't go bust per se. They just couldn't keep up with their debts from COVID, and their landlord wanted out and all sorts of ugliness. So they're still going as a brand, but I can't wander along to them. But in a semi-similar boast, not too long ago, just over a year ago, not too far away, just a quick hop and a skip and a jump on public transport, is a great new brewery called Great Beyond. So that's fantastic. Really excited. But much as I love Great Beyond, and I'm sorry, John and the gang, I'm going to say is the one that I'm most excited about this year is actually up in Manchester. And it's a brewery called Balance. And I cannot believe the audacity of a wild mixed firm, whatever you want to call it, brewery, to open up and straight out of the gate have such truly sensational mixed firm beers. Like, incredible. Their tap room's like a shabby boudoir on an industrial estate, when it's the antithesis of an industrial estate brewery. It's all sort of broken down damask furniture and comfortable little corners and lots of soft furnishing and curtains on the walls so that everything doesn't echo around the place. It's actually one of the very rare warm tap rooms, particularly in Manchester. And it is just, the beers are out of this world.
Nice. Matt, brewery that closed that made you sad? Brewery you discovered this year that made you happy?
Yeah, brewery that closed. Again, I'm being tucked down under. I'm going to internationalize it, and it was just fascinating watching all of the news around Anchor Steam closing. You know, It was even down here. It was a brewery that everyone knew about, anyone who had an interest in craft beer, because of its role in the modern craft beer movement. And just watching all of the stories coming out of it about it just sounds like it was a disaster from being purchased, but then it was a brewery that, you know, I think I've heard, I didn't get to drink it very often, but it sounded like that there were quality issues and you really had to love the brand.
Yeah, you're not missing much.
Beer. Yeah, but it says so much about the tensions that exist within the industry, and also the fickleness of consumers because of the number of, people coming out and decrying, being so unhappy that it closed, and condemning the corporate masters when they hadn't bought it for years, and forgetting that, if we don't support breweries, they don't stay open. If breweries don't modernize and stay, ahead of trends, or stay at least on trend, we lose them. So there was just so much out of that was teaching moments for me. But it was ultimately very, very sad that an old storied brewery has gone. And we will see a lot more of those go if we don't heed the lessons from it. Locally, I mean, there's one brewery, and if you came to Australia, John, I would take you there, because they opened 5 years ago. It's called Heads of Noosa. It's in a beautiful part of the world. It's Noosa Heads, which is one of those amazing beach communities that you just see photographed. It's one of the perceptions of Australia. But they opened 5 years ago on a fairly large scale for a craft brewery. But they own, when hazies were first coming, but being huge and taking over the market, they opened up as a lager brewery. They opened with a Japanese lager, so a light, crisp, easy drinking lager, and they only did bottles. So everything that they did was so counterintuitive for the times. But I just interviewed them this week, 5 years on, and they just seem to have gone very well. They anticipated a trend. Everyone's trying to get into large volume or beers that can become a larger volume, that break out of the craft beer niche. So we've seen a lot of Mexican, adjunct beers. We've seen a lot of Japanese rice beers. But these guys just did it. They make a Pilsner. They make a really nice sort of Bock Light. They make a Bock. They've just released a Japanese black lager. And if you'd asked 5 years ago, I would have had real worry that they were just pitching their brand wrong. But they've been so, apart from making great beer, the business has just been, they've known what they've been doing, and they've just stuck to their own lane. They've not looked at anybody else. And that's something that still excites me. In a world of sameness, they did something different and really executed it well, and seem to be doing well for it.
I dig it. Brandon Hernandez, 2 minutes or less. Brewery that closed.
Oh, no, I get to live it. All right, great. Well, I'll make this very fast. Okay.
That's because Brandon, by the way, is sending me emails as we're talking, saying, "Gosh, if I'm going too long, just feel free to cut me out." And I swear to God, my favorite thing about hanging out with writers on podcasts is that you all talk like you're getting paid by the word.
Yes,
tell me I'm wrong. Yeah,
Shepard, right.
Shepard and Melissa are both muted, and yeah, now you guys are quiet. No, Brandon.
Okay, here we go. So I would say, well, this year I actually have the pleasure of saying internationally, going to Schlenkerla with a certain John Hall was really awesome. Fun. I mean, just seeing what they put into everything, even after all these years, and the passion they have for it was just amazing. Last week I was at a place called Offset Beer where they knew who John Hall was.
Down in Park City, Utah. Yeah.
Park City, Utah. But that joke aside, I mentioned it because it made me really happy. It's a place that doesn't look like much. It's off the main drag, and there is just the main drag is pretty much the entire city of Park City. You walk in there, and it's just this giant passion project from a figurative speaking place. Great IPAs, great lagers, all these styles that you're probably not going to come across at your average tap room, including two smoked German style lagers. It was just an amazing place. If you're in Park City, please go there. Now, for my own hometown, I have a pseudo answer. Place I went to this year made me happy was Modern Times. I have not been a big Modern Times fan over the history of that company, and it's not just because I really didn't like somebody who happened to own the place who said I had a problem with everybody at that company when I only had a problem with them. It is so much better now. The people there are so much happier as far as the people who are doing everyday work there as staffers. they feel rejuvenated from what I hear, and they're putting out great beer. And the new regime is just a much more positive one, and you can feel it in their tap room. So if you kind of swore off that place, there's some really good people working there, including new hires. I would definitely recommend giving it another shot if you'd like.
Okay.
Go Garrett. And then a more literal thing. I go to the Padres games all the time, and it's down at Petco Park in downtown San Diego. East Village Brewing Company is across the street from that place. Opened up year before last. It was two high-level Ballast Point folks who left after the company was sold so they could open a 1,000 square foot brewery and tasting room. They're putting out solid beers. And I figure I'd mention this one because not only did it make me happy and I enjoyed it, but I think that a lot of people can. And if you come to San Diego, there's a chance you might go to a game. So there's news you can use. As far as places that closed, one thing that I love about my job, the best part of my job, in fact, is to get to meet all these people at all of these breweries. I literally am in contact with and know people at every single brewery in San Diego. And I love that. I've gotten to know them over the years. So, all of the closings almost made me pretty sad. I mean, I've actually, not to get too personal here, but the last several months I've kind of struggled with the amount of closures and sharing these stories, and it's painful,
Well, you guys are 15 years ahead of everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I was just a beat writer and I didn't really know folks and somebody assigned me something, I ran out there and I just met somebody real quick and wrote about it. I seek out everybody as they're coming in. I'm usually the first person they meet who's not, in the brewing industry, and I get to tell their story. I get to tell their beginnings and the course of their lifespan. So now it's turning out that I'm becoming the last person they talk to on their way out, and I get actually the privilege of conveying, their history and what they've achieved, and letting them go out with the class that they deserve, and try to get people in the door there the last week or so that they're going to be open so people can go appreciate it before it's gone. But they've all saddened me quite a bit, and I keep hoping that the floodgates will close, and I think they will eventually, but it's just some really good people who won't be doing this anymore, and I hope that their staffs find homes and keep making the brewing industry here as good as it has been for so long.
That's awesome. 2 minutes times 3. Excellent. Thanks everybody. Thanks for doing
John.
this.
Yeah,
Thanks
John.
for putting this
Thank
together
you.
once again.
We'll try to do this in person one of these years. I don't know how, I don't know where, but I think it'd be great.
I'm already looking at flights.
Oh, excellent. Perfect. Yeah.
Well, don't forget the connecting flight to Australia, because we're going to start at Industrial Arts and then we're going to head up to
if you go back and listen to the tape, Matt only invited me. So thanks so much. And I'll send you all a postcard. This is always a pleasure. And for the weird year that it was, it's great to hear perspective from around the world from all of you. So thanks for doing this. And I mean, I'll be talking to you all before we do this again next year, but thanks again.
Do you have a beer resolution for the new year? Let me know. You can email me. It's John Hall. That's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com. Or you can get with me on Instagram at Mr. John Hall. All About Beer is on Facebook, X, and Instagram. Follow along at All About Beer. And of course, This Week in Rauk Beer is also online. As always, the Facebook group is easy to search. And on X and Instagram, it's at TW Rauk Beer. We're able to bring you the show each week thanks to the companies that want to support independent journalism in the beer space. If you'd like to learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates, please reach out to info@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of that, this episode is brought to you by Pro Brewer. We bring original articles to probrewer.com each week, covering issues important to the beer industry and aimed at helping breweries of all sizes understand different facets of the business. Check out our articles on probrewer.com every Tuesday and visit the site daily for other original content and to stay connected with the beer industry. Don't forget, All About Beer is a podcast channel now. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal the Spear has new episodes every Monday. The BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. And don't forget, go visit allaboutbeer.com. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.